Hi, everyone, and welcome back to season three of Commerce Meets Law, a podcast where we talk about various commercial topics and how they interact with the legal profession. Today's episode is a super exciting episode and conversation with Milan Joshi, a senior payments and data lawyer with over a decade of experience in the global payments industry. Having started out his career with a degree in computer science, Milan's journey has transitioned from tech to training as a solicitor at Reed Smith, working across various areas of law, and most recently having worked at Barclaycard as their legal counsel for over 8 years. In this episode, we discuss firstly why Milan decided to pivot from a career in tech to the legal profession, his journey to getting a training contract, and also his brief stint in media law post qualification, how he came across the field of payments and ended up advising Visa Europe on the rollout of Apple Pay back in 2015. This was really interesting to me, especially as someone who, and I'm sure many of you listening do the same, literally, pay with my phone every day, to know that actually it wasn't all that long ago that this came into our existence. So that was a super interesting story, and I hope that you really enjoyed that aspect. We also talk a little bit about how payments actually work, and for any of you who are interested in either the tech side or the legal side of this, or just want to know what happens every time you use your phone to pay, I think that Milan provided a fantastic explanation. Finally, we discuss what his role consisted of at Barclaycard as legal counsel and his thoughts on balancing privacy and data protection regulation alongside the advancing technological growth that we're seeing in the payments industry, and not just in the payments industry, but how that links to AI and all the other things that have become all the talk and all the conversation in 2026. So anyone interested in tech, understanding how technologies like Apple Pay work, or even why it took so long for a fintech company like Revolut to gain regulatory approval in the UK to operate as a fully fledged bank. Any of you on your commercial awareness have probably seen this, or any of you with the Revolut card have probably seen this news as well. So if any of those things interest you, this episode is definitely for you. Just a quick request before we get into the conversation. I would really appreciate if you'd kindly give the podcast a follow and a rating on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to these episodes, as it really helps Commerce Meets Law reach more listeners. Without further ado, I hope you enjoy this episode, and I'll see you right at the end. I'm very excited to have you on the podcast today and talk all about your journey and learn about life as a payments lawyer as well. But we always have an icebreaker on the podcast, which is, in your opinion, what is your superpower?
My superpower, I would say, is my ability to establish rapport quickly with anyone and everyone. And for that, I take zero credit. All credit goes to my late mother. She ran a post office and shop, and from a young age, when helping out, I used to watch how she interacted with strangers, customers, neighbors, and just her ability to engage with people from all walks of life and to establish rapport really stuck with me, and is something that I've tried to emulate over the years. So like I say, that's my superpower, but I take no credit for that at all, and all credit goes to my mum.
Yeah, I love that. And, that thing of like, children learn from the way that their parents kind of what they're doing instead of what they're saying. And that's so clear in your story there as well. And building rapport is such an important aspect of not just law, but so many other professions. But your career began in tech, began in computing before you came into law. So can you tell us a little bit about, what your journey was like in tech and why you decided to make the pivot into the legal profession?
Sure. So my first degree was computer science. It was as a network engineer and then a programmer. And in short answer is boredom, because it got to a stage where I just wasn't excited as I thought I'd be um, in my chosen career. And I'd had a chat with a neighbour of mine as a solicitor about careers, and I said, look, I really enjoy liaising with clients,
Mm.
sitting down with them, working out what they want, and problem solving, being really creative, writing thousands of lines of code just wasn't just didn't float my boat. and
Yeah.
she suggested researching a career in law. So, and that's what I did. Loads of research, and I thought, right, let's go for it. Let's try and make it in the legal profession. And then I went back to uni to study law, being a mature student. And yeah, I think it just shows that it's never ever too late to pivot into a separate career. Some people think, "Oh no, I'm too old." You're actually never too old, and if it's something that you're interested in, go for it. Go grab the ball by the horns.
Absolutely. And now that, we have ever longer careers, I think that's definitely more room to pivot at much later ages. You don't have to know, what you want to do at 20 and then decide to do that for the rest of your life for sure. And in terms of, ends up training at Reed Smith and that for a lot of people listening, that's a city law firm. It might be a goal for many people. So for you, I guess, coming into it as a mature student, coming into it from a different profession, what were some of the challenges you faced in getting a training contract, and how did that journey sort of end up taking place and ending up in Reed Smith?
Yeah, so it was a lot of applications,
Yeah.
and um, and it was really tough. And I think I was a bit naive. I just thought, oh, you just apply and you just get it. And it wasn't like that. The competition was
Yeah.
incredibly fierce. And I remember Reed Smith, or as it was then, Richards Butler. So there was a verbal reasoning test, and then after that, then if you pass that, then there's the interview stage, and before that, sorry, there was an inbox tray exercise. Um, you have to read a load of documents, and then the interviewers came in and they asked you about the deal that you had to read about, and I think one wrong question, and that's it. The interview's over, and then after that was a general interview, and then I was fortunate, and then I got a training contract, but I think the two things that really, I think, well, a few things, but I think one of the main things that really helped me in my applications was not to think like a student, or not to think like like someone who's not a trainee. So
Mm,
it was about thinking, what would a trainee do in this situation? What would a solicitor do? And how the trainee, and then when you put yourself in that position, your answers on an application form, in my experience, becomes better,
yeah.
um, and you carry yourself, and also the treat every rejection just like another spreadsheet. So I had my spreadsheet of applications,
Yeah.
and then if I got a rejection, just recorded it on the spreadsheet and just moved on. It's
Mm,
really easy and you really easy to feel disheartened after a few rejections. Think, oh, it's not for me.
mm.
Just got to keep plugging away, and not. It's really hard to do, but not to take it personally. And then that's where I ended up at Reed Smith.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's even harder coming from academia and coming straight from uni because you are so drilled in that mindset of writing like a student instead of writing like a solicitor or professional. And I think, like you say, that mindset switch is really, really key because the work and reality of working as a lawyer is very different to the study of it or the academic side
Mm.
to it. And in terms of, your journey's had so many different inflection points, so many different transitions. The one thing I really wanted to talk about was after your qualification at Reed Smith, you had a bit of a stint in media and IP, and you did a bit of that work at Reed Smith as well. So could you tell us a little bit about what that transition was like and why you decided to go and work within the field of media and IP law after?
Yeah. So the when you qualify, there's what's called the jobs board at a firm, and so there's the jobs that
Yeah.
are available. Um, so there was a point where I was thinking I could become a ship finance lawyer. Not It's not particularly. I mean, it's a fascinating area for others, but for me personally, for where
Yeah.
I want my career to go, I think that's going to take me away from what I'm
Mm,
interested in. So, but right, let me focus on the area of IP, IT, media, and sort of try and stay in that region. And that's why I applied to Simon and Burton, working in litigation, but predominantly media litigation, a bit of IP
Mm,
as well. Um, so there was that transition from the training contract to Reed Smith to becoming a solicitor and still staying in the realms of what I'm interested in. And it was really interesting. At Simon and Burton, we acted for a tabloid, and invariably they wanted to have their Sunday scoops, which is always the same thing. It was a middle-aged, well, not middle-aged. It was a powerful celeb man who's married and wants to, who has had an affair. The the lady who's had an affair with wants to sell her story. He wants to stop that story coming out. So on Saturday night, would have
yeah,
assisting the partner in injunction hearings before a judge, where the celeb says no, it's a private matter, it shouldn't be published, and we'd say, well, we'd be acting for the tabloid to say, well, it should be published because of the public interest, and there's a hypocrisy element. The judge would rule, and nearly all the time, the judge say no, the publication is allowed.
yeah,
So yeah, and then interviewing those who had the affair, going to a glamour model's hotel room to get to sign an affidavit, and then having to explain to her what an affidavit was. This is the stuff they don't teach you in law school. So it was a wake up call, but it was really really interesting work and working with fantastic lawyers at Simons
yeah.
Vernon Burn.
Yeah, sounds amazing. And we spoke a little bit about, your transition from having a very kind of STEM background into law and having to kind of adapt. But also in terms of the working life, I guess, a lot of people think about tech. They think about someone behind the computer coding all day. There's not a lot of people interaction in that sense. And law, and especially the field you're in, seem to have been the complete opposite of that. So I guess, did you find that transition at all difficult, or what sort of things did you have to adapt to, which you didn't have in your earlier tech career?
I actually really enjoyed it because
Yeah,
I'm a people person. I love interacting with people.
yeah,
I didn't really enjoy sitting in the basement writing code. But I think it's it's clients wanting a yes or no, and you can't really give a yes or no, and something you have
mm,
to say, well, there are risks if you go with this route. There are risks if you go with that route. There are less risks,
mm,
and then trying to navigate and help them on the journey,
yeah,
um, and just trying to sort of relay that if there are absolutes, yes or no, you don't need lawyers because it's crystal clear what the result is going to be. That you don't need a
yeah,
lawyer to interpret the law for you if it's crystal clear. And
hmm,
I think going from that yes no certainty to everything could be arguable and trying to convey that to someone who wants certainty, I think
yeah.
that was a challenge.
Definitely, yeah. And I think, having when you do, like, even when people do A levels, they do subjects, like doing subjects like STEM and math, there's an objectivity, there's a level of like, this is the right answer. This certain input gives you a certain output. And with law, that's very, very different. Like you say, the gray areas is kind of where lawyers come in, because if everything was so black and white, we wouldn't have jobs. So that's
Hmm.
a really interesting thing to think about as well. After your sort of stint in media and IP, you decided to go back into or go in house and work with Visa. And this part of your story I found really, really interesting. So, can you tell us a bit about how this opportunity came up and what you ended up doing whilst you were at Visa?
Yeah, so it was only supposed to be an initial contract for a few months, and
Ah,
then we liked each other, as in Visa liked me, I liked Visa, and then
yeah.
sort of stayed longer there for a permanent position. And originally it was doing contracts, especially like software licenses, tech contracts,
Mm,
and so on. But it was my first foray into the world of payments, and I had no no experience whatsoever in that world at all. And then at Visa Europe, at that time, was that's when Apple Pay was coming about.
Mhm.
Um, and so then I was involved in the whole Apple Pay project and revolutionize how people pay. I'm happy to talk about that if that's
For
like.
sure. Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
so important because, so many of us use Apple Pay on like a daily basis, probably without even
Mm.
thinking about it. So I guess if you could take yourself back to when you knew nothing about payments and you were introduced to Apple Pay and explain it like that to us, I think that would be super interesting.
Yeah, so I think it's a very steep learning curve
Yeah.
about how the payments in how payments work and how when you use your credit card, when you use your debit card, what are the steps that are involved? Why do those steps happen, and what essentially happens? And when getting my head around it, when I took a step back, I was thinking, well, when you get rid of all the noise, all it is just data flows. Data just flows from one server to, or one party to another, to another, to another. There are various conversations that happen at each point, and that's it. I think that was easy for me to understand because of my computer science background and being very familiar with data flows and just and that's all that is. That's all payments is in terms of credit card and debit card. Apple Pay brought it onto another level where you don't need to have your plastic, you get your plastic credit debit card out of your wallet. You use your phone. And so,
Mm,
and it's really interesting, the evolution of the phone. The phone was something that some people use for text messages and phone calls, but now that's evolved into a photography device that's used for playing music, that's used for surfing the web, doing your emails.
mm,
Now it's used for payments as well.
yeah.
Um, so there was initial discussions in terms of can the technology work? This is a pretty big thing that's happening. But what Apple wants it to happen, can it actually be done? So a lot of
Mm,
conversations on that side. Once there was a level of confidence that actually it could be done, then you get into the contractual stage of agreeing something with Apple in terms of what are the obligations between the parties, what happens when this scenario happens, which is conceivable, and then the catch-all scenario, and various other provisions between the parties until we've
mm,
agreed something that everyone's okay with, and then on with the launch. And it was really interesting going out to get a cup of tea and seeing somebody playing with their
yeah.
plastic, and I'm thinking I'm working on something that's going to change the landscape, but I can't tell you because it's
Yeah.
ultra secret. Um, um, yeah, and then when people started using their Apple their iPhone, and it was just like, oh, I was working on that. That's really interesting. It was really
Yeah.
innovative and cutting edge, and yeah, again, working with some fantastic people at Visa Europe, the engineers as well as those in legal.
Yeah. That's amazing. And especially because I think you were at such like a crossroads in terms of you understood it from a tech perspective, having your tech background, and equally as
Mm.
a lawyer, you were also approaching it from a legal perspective. I guess, when you were between, I guess, the engineers and the lawyers who perhaps didn't have your tech background, were there any conversations you were having internally to explain the tech aspects of it? Or kind of how did, I guess, lawyers who didn't have that background, how were they able to wrap their head around what was happening?
I think this is where I do go to my trusty diagrams. Whenever I
Yeah.
explain things, I always go for because my brain works in diagrams, and that's probably
Mm.
because of my computer science days. That's how I understand things. So when I get a sheet of paper and then I draw, and to me it's just a journey. So essentially, I'm drawing a journey, and that's how
Mm,
I explain it to those who are having trouble understanding the technicalities of how the journey happens. I said, well, this happened, this data flow. Let's bring it down to its basics. It's just a data flow, and there are conversations happening, and this
mm,
is the journey. And then once that's happened, then everyone can visualize it and go, oh right, okay, I can see how the journey happens, and so that I hope that was of benefit to those who didn't understand. But after I drew that diagram, they did understand.
Definitely. And that idea of like conversations is so interesting because I bet, when we're taking our phone and paying for that cup of tea or coffee or whatever, no one is it's a 2 second thing, so you're not really thinking about it. But when you actually think about it a little bit further and more deeply, it's so interesting, how many things are happening in such a short time of time. Like that technology is crazy. And like you say, so much negotiation would have had to happen in order to make sure that everyone's obligations in those 2 3 second transactions, which are happening millions of times a day, that's all crystal clear. And from there on, you moved on to Barclaycard in terms of your next stint. And many people listening would be aware of Barclays and would be aware of what it does, but may not be of Barclaycard in terms of the organization. So can you tell us a bit about where that sits within Barclays and what your role was at Barclaycard?
Sure. So Barclays, well, umbrella, and then you've got different divisions
Mm.
in Barclays, and then Barclaycard was just one of those divisions. And in the payments journey, it's the one that actually sits alongside the merchant. So, um, so my roles evolved over time, but essentially was in helping the business with advising, drafting, negotiating contracts with merchants, businesses who want to accept credit card, debit cards. So when I say merchants, if you go to a shop, they can accept cash. That's fine. But if they want to accept credit card or debit card, they need what's called an acquiring bank. And Barclaycard is an option for them. So, and
Right.
then I help the business in terms of contracts, in terms of how we process their data and the charges for that and
Mm.
various fallback provisions. Then advising on regulations. Payments regulations was evolving massively then. Um, Also helping with the product team any questions they have in terms of different technicalities and innovative products that they were looking to deploy, and assisting other parts of within Barclaycard, for example, partnerships on how to partner with different organizations to accelerate growth. And over time, I had to do a lot of data work, so data protection in terms of contractual negotiations,
Mm.
drafting contractual terms, and data governance in terms of how we use data internally has to be compliant, whether the checks and balances are in play. And towards the end of my tenure at Barclaycard, AI as well. So if you have data protection, data governance, AI, and payments, and if they all intersect, then there's me in the middle, and that's
Yeah.
kind of where I sit.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And especially now with, I mean, I'm sure everyone listening knows like so much is on data, where that's AI, payments, things we do every day. Everything is so dependent on our data and that's become such a big part. And obviously there's two sides of that in terms of the growth in the tech is happening so quickly and equally we need enough protection, enough regulation. I guess from your perspective, having had so much experience now within payments and therefore within data and AI as well, how quickly do you think regulation is catching up? I mean, did you face any challenges when you were trying to think, okay, this is happening, but what would be the safeguards against it? Where do you think regulation is standing on that, at least just from a UK perspective?
Yeah, I think it's really difficult because regulation can only go so far because there is a massive lead up to consultation, drafting. What are you regulating for?
Mm,
Then by the time you finished all of that, technology's moved on.
yeah,
So the initial premise of what you're regulating for, that doesn't exist anymore largely because the technology is moving at such a rapid pace and
absolutely.
regulation's always catching up. And that's why GDPR is very principles based, is risk based. So you've got principles on how data should be used if you're a
Mm,
controller and you apply them to your business. It's not prescriptive for every single scenario. And applying that in the world of payments isn't straightforward because it's not a clear-cut answer. And
Mm.
you apply GDPR or any data protection law too strictly and you inhibit growth. But then if
Yeah.
you apply it too loosely, growth accelerates, but then there's a risk, there's a breach of regulation. So trying to find that sweet spot is not straightforward, but very interesting
Mm.
to try and be within the guardrails to accelerate growth within the business, but also at the end of the day, protecting personal data because it's a philosophy within Europe when we were in the EU. Um, so it's a human right at the end of the day. So
Yeah.
when you get rid of all the noise, if I'm processing your personal data, what is my lawful basis for processing that?
Mm.
Um, are you going to experience detriment? What is the reasonable expectation of you when I process your data? And I
Yeah.
think once those questions are navigated and answered, then it flows to other areas as well. Um, so it gets really interesting because the tech is getting more complex, more interesting, more innovative, whereas the law is sort of here, and the gap widens and widens and widens, and who knows, we might have a GDPR version 2 in a few years
Yeah.
just to try and close that gap.
Yeah, and it's interesting with AI as well, because obviously the EU is, I guess a bit more stringent on the regulation in terms of the EU Act and things like that. And I guess in the world of payments, putting your tech hat on and having been part of Apple Pay, which at the time seemed really revolutionary and now seems like just another thing that you have to pay with. I guess where do you see payments going next? I mean, will it be the case where it becomes autonomous and we just get like our AI agents to pay for us? Like, where do you see that going, and how can the law regulate that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one with agentic commerce. So that's where Mastercard um, deployed the first agentic commerce transaction in Dubai. I think
Yeah,
it was November time,
yeah,
anywhere in the world. And I think when it comes to European regulation with PSD2 and GDPR, there are interesting questions to be asked before things like that get deployed, like liability, and in terms of what is the
absolutely.
role of the agentic commerce? Does that actually fit the role of the one who's authorizing the transaction? And
Mm,
AI can hallucinate. So if it's a mistake, um, does that what does that happen on the transaction in total? So a lot of questions being asked, but I think where where things will naturally go is trying to make it really slick and seamless for the customer to spend their money
yeah,
because that's what it's all about. It's all about
yeah,
trying to reduce friction for the customer. But
mm,
then you have to throw into that goes right. We want to avoid fraud as well. So then you have strong customer authentication as well. So
mm,
is that it's a kind of push pull where let's make it
yeah,
really seamless, really quick, so the customer doesn't have to think that much and it's frictionless. But then if we make it too much like that, then where the protections for fraud? Do we have to have those protections? And then you have that sort of tug of war to try and get something which is good for the customer, but doesn't inhibit growth as well. And there's always going to be that push me and pull you, um, because then regulation is there to protect consumers, and fraud is on the rise. So
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you hear about all these AI scams and everything, and you're kind of, I guess, scammers also using more of the tech. And as much as AI can be a growth and a thing for good, it can also be used for those exact purposes. And fraud can also get more complicated and more complex with it for sure. And I mean, this stuff I feel like is so interesting. And for those listening who are interested in data and stuff, I'm sure they'll be really interested in hearing more about it. But bringing it back to those who want to be commercially aware and a bit more into payments, I guess a lot of people would have read the news about Revolut about last week, I think very recently, getting
Hmm.
its becoming a fully fledged bank, getting that banking license, and waiting 5 years for that approval. Talking about regulation as we mentioned earlier. For those who maybe have just read that headline and don't fully understand, what that actually means, could you help us break it down a little bit in terms of what Revolut couldn't do before and what they can do now with this approval?
So yeah, so there are, because they had a limited scope and what they can do. So their business model is quite limited. So
Mm,
they couldn't be fully fledged. So there are, I say, handcuffs in terms of how they can accelerate
yeah,
growth in their business. But and then now they've got a license, it's almost like, right, some of the handcuffs have come off, and then they can now grow their business to attract more customers. And it's interesting with the wait time, and some people are critical of that. And I think the
yeah,
spectre of the 2008 crash looms quite heavy still on the FCA. And
yeah,
so I think one of the things the FCA will be thinking about is, well, what is your business model? And if it's not clear, there'll be a lot of back and forth. I don't understand
mm,
it. And if I don't understand it, I'm not going to grant you a license. So I think there's an explanation part of like the core business model, and then there are questions about audit, compliance, internal governance.
yeah,
Have you got a robust internal governance function? Is it meaningful, or is it just there to rubber stamp things? Um, Anti-money laundering, which is a big thing as well. Do you have a good, robust function for anti-money laundering? Also, I think if Revolut were in other jurisdictions and they face problems,
yeah,
then I'd imagine the FCA would take a deep breath and go, "Whoa, let's wait um, and see how you are for a period of time here
yeah,
before we give you that approval." In my opinion, also, I think things can get very political very easily. So, for example, if there's a rush to provide a license and then something catastrophic happens with the bank in terms of their governance functions, customers lose out, customers lose money.
absolutely.
Um, it's news, right? And then over in Parliament, no doubt there'll be a lot of MPs aiming fire at the FCA, saying it's your job to oversee financial
Mm,
institutions, and on your watch, this happened. Like,
yeah,
so maybe you're not fit for purpose, or maybe you need to be revolutionized. So
yeah.
it can get very political very quickly when things go wrong. And I think because of that, in and various other reasons, I think that's why things move at a very steady pace to ensure that nothing untoward happens.
And so, yeah, when you start thinking about it, you realize there's so many layers to that, and it's not just a case of like, oh, just reviewing their financial accounts and giving them that approval. There's so many different things they have to consider, for sure, and especially having that, having that approval means that they are recognized in order to get to that position. The FCA and organizations like that need to be so sure about it. And for a lot of people listening who've enjoyed the discussion so far and who, are interested in payments or interested in data because as we explored, it covers so many different topics. I know that you've done a lot of work whilst you were at Barclays to try and help the profession become more diverse, to help people learn a bit more about, the core profession and it not be like a certain stereotype of which person can enter. Can you tell us a little bit about, I guess, some of the work that you have done to do this and what message you would want to give to those people who think that the corporate profession may not want someone like them or someone from their background?
Sure. So I ran and organised an event called the Barclays Legal Experience Week, Blue, as it was
Yeah.
called. So um, and we did it in September. worked with an organisation called Aspiring Solicitors. So Aspiring Solicitors provided 60 um, students who and from underrepresented groups, so either socially mobile, uh, Black and ethnic minority, neurodiverse, has a disability, or um, LGBTQ plus. So it's those underrepresented groups within the legal profession
Yeah.
who are trying to be seen by the major law firms, and there's a view that the major law firms are still too stuffy in picking candidates. But that's a conversation for another day. But so
Yeah.
with the so with the week insights program, which I created the timetable for, um, there were various things about like introduction to M&A, introduction to litigation, introduction to corporate banking, and volunteers at Barclays, the lawyers, um, gave those sessions, but asked them to not just talk at the students for like 20 minutes, but actually have a case study. So, and then get the interaction going with the students. So they know what it's like to be an employment lawyer. This is the problems you may have, or litigation lawyer, or a corporate banking lawyer. Also worked with external law firms, so at Freshfields, who ran a negotiation exercise. So I
Mm.
split the students in groups. So one were tenants, one were landlords, and they all had their brief and they entered into negotiation. And that's to get them to experience what a negotiation is. Commercial pitch competitions. So I've put them into groups. So we had to pitch for commercial and pitch, or there had to be a law firm pitching to Barclays senior lawyers. Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday was virtual. Wednesday was in person, and rather than it being London, it was organised for it to be spread across. So on Wednesday, depending on how close you live, you can either go into the London office of Barclays, or the Birmingham office of Barclays, or the Glasgow office of Barclays. And the good thing is that you're going into a behemoth organisation, a huge building. You're entering into a corporate environment. So there's a way of being in the corporate world, which is good practice for the students. Also, they get to meet Barclays lawyers and network with them. So it's really important that they establish the practice of networking, because as lawyers, you're going to have to network,
Yeah.
um, whether you like it or not. And what was really good is that the general counsel was, wanted to be involved, which is great. And so the general counsel of Barclays were involved. So there's a Q&A session. So he talked about his journey, and the students could ask him questions. And it was really good because I think there's a view as a student that if you're general counsel for Barclays, you must have had a perfect journey like that without any deviation. And actually, I think it was comforting that actually somebody think there's perfection, but actually there are challenges, and actually their journey was like that.
Yeah.
And actually everyone's journey is like that. And so he enjoyed it, and so that worked out really well. So yeah, and even though I ran and organised, I managed about 200 people in the whole process. Oh, this is all side of the desk as well. So I was doing my normal day
Yeah.
job, and this is all side of the desk, like so the evening or weekends. But I really enjoyed it. But it wouldn't have been a success without the Barclays lawyers who volunteered their time to help as well, and the external um, law firms who supported us. So it was a big team effort. So yeah, and I wanted to get across that. I wanted to break down barriers. So there
Yeah.
was one student who was terrified when she came in on the Wednesday in the London office, but then in the afternoon she kind of came out of her shell and she said, "Look, I'm the first of my family to go to university. I live in East London. Canary Wharf, Barclays, the city is a world away, and maybe I don't belong. But actually, coming here and mixing with everyone, maybe I do belong." And I thought,
Mm.
fantastic. This is the whole point, to break down barriers So then you have the confidence to work in the city if that's where you want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And if, you could go back to yourself starting out in law and someone's listening and they want to, whether it's payments or another area, they want to get into it, I guess, what's one piece of advice you would give them? Something that really helped you or some advice that someone gave you at some point?
Um, get into the mindset of who you want to be your next stage up. So you're a
Mm.
student applying for a training contract. Don't have the mindset of a student. Have the mindset of a trainee solicitor. Think like a trainee
Mm.
solicitor. Think about what's important for a trainee solicitor. And when you're approaching tasks, think about how a trainee solicitor would approach drafting, communicating, advising, presenting, managing, working under pressure. So once you get into that mindset, then things naturally evolve. So that's
Yeah.
one piece of advice, but don't be stuck in a student mindset.
Yeah, I love that. And to end on a bit of a fun note, I was reading through your LinkedIn post and the things that you're talking about, and alongside you mentioning also that you really enjoy guitar and music, I also saw that you featured in a song. And I mean, very often my knowledge of metal bands is pretty limited, but I thought this was really cool. So could you tell us a little bit about when your fascination with kind of metal music began and how this featuring on a song came about to be?
Yeah, I've got years. I've started off with Guns N' Roses and hard rock, and then it went on
Yeah,
to heavier,
that I
hev
know.
yeah, that that everyone knows. Yeah, so
Yeah, that
and then it went on
I
to heavier stuff like heavy metal and death metal, and it's one of those. Been listening to it for decades, and it's something that I love, and it's yeah, it's not many of us lawyers who are into death metal. So
yeah.
if you see me in the office, if those who saw me in the office, my headphones on, concentrating whilst drafting a contract or complex legal advice, they know that I'm listening to metal to get me in the
Wow.
concentration zone. And so, yeah, I mean, so it's yeah, I just love metal dearly. And Megadeth, I've seen them about 40 times in about 5 countries, so a massive fan. And over the years, bizarrely, I've gone from a fan to a super fan to a friend of the frontman, Dave Mustaine. So, and then I was in the studio actually in when they were recording their album about 10 years ago, which was great, but really bizarre being in the studio having sushi with the frontman talking about media law. It was just the most bizarre
Wow.
conversation. But then he reached out to me by email a few years ago and said, "Look, can you do a voice sample? Because they're recording their new album. He has an idea for a song. Can you do a voice sample?" So we chatted over email a few times and by phone, and then to work out what exactly he wanted, and
Hmm.
and so I did voice samples, sent them by email a few times, and we went back and forth, and then I think he was happy with the final result. Because they were recording the album in America and I was in London,
Yeah.
so it did require me flying over. Um, and then later on, yeah, he emailed me and said, "Look, here's a demo of the song. You're on it, but don't tell anyone until the song's out." So, so here's homework for everyone. If you listen to the song "The Sick, the Dying, and the Dead" by Megadeth, the first 30 seconds, you'll hear a guy shouting, "Bring out your dead." That's me. So that's me shouting, "Bring out your
Wow.
dead." So that's my 30 seconds of fame, and
Came to
now
finish.
my 30 seconds of fame before returning to life as a lawyer. So
I love that, and we're definitely going to link it down below so that everyone can go listen to it after this, and especially those who are into metal or like that sort of music for sure. And I'm going to go listen to it now that I know which part you feature on as well. But on that note, man, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I feel like we covered so many different topics. It was so interesting to hear about your journey and hear about how you got into payments, and I feel like I'm never going to I feel like every time now when I pay with Apple Pay, I think about it so differently, and I'm sure many people listening are as well. But thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Pleasure.
And on that note, thank you so much for listening to this episode, and a massive shout out to Milan for coming on Commerce Meets Law. If you enjoyed this episode, please do let me know by emailing commercemeetslaw@gmail.com or with the DM on Instagram at Commerce Meets Law. And you can also reach out to us on our website, which will be linked down in the description. Finally, for access to my content, do check out the Commerce Meets Law YouTube channel and our TikTok. And also, if you listened right to the end, definitely make sure you check out the Megadeth song that Milan has featured in. It is linked down below. So make sure you click that link and go give it a listen. For now, take care, goodbye, and I'll see you very soon on the next episode.